presentation. Sorry, I've got a window in the middle of everything. Let me get rid of that. So our presentation will be create your CentOS Homelab in about an hour. If you want to follow along with the slides, because I do talk kind of fast, the slides are available at github.com/murphnj/our-lab, and just take the latest one in the list. I just dumped them all in there. So let's get started. So I am Bob Murphy. I am a Linux systems administrator. I currently hold the Red Hat Certified Engineer certification. I am a long time on and off Trenton Computer Festival attendee and exhibitor. I was mentioning in the chat earlier that I used to do an Amiga. You can see my Amiga poster back there. I used to do an Amiga users group table, booth for many years through most of the 90s. And really enjoyed that. I've been on and off since then, but always a good time. If you want to contact me, you can contact me via email at murph@member.fsf.org, or you can contact me on the Fediverse at murph@fosstodon.org. So I want to get back to this slide when we have a little time when we're waiting for stuff. So to set up a home lab like this, we're going to have actually, let me go back. I'll discuss this now, and I'll leave a little time for questions while we're waiting for things. So to set up a home lab like this allows us to very quickly and easily set up and rebuild new VMs. It gives us stability in the versions of the operating system. So if you have set up your home lab with a version of CentOS 8.2, you don't have to worry about some of the machines being at 8.2. Some have been updated to 8.3, so your versions are different. Things are reacting differently. And I'll explain a little bit about why I set this up like this. When I was studying for the Red Hat exams, the System Administrator exam and the Certified Engineer exam, I ran into issues where, you would go set up and, you want to move around. I mean, this was before, this was the before times, before COVID. You would go out to a coffee shop or something to study. And I always had my PDFs on my machine. I was ready to go. I'd have my VMs. But then you sit down, you connect to the Wi-Fi at whatever place you're at, and it turns out, oh, their network isn't working. Well, so I've got my PDF, I've got my stuff, I'm ready to go. Let me install the web server to practice the web server portion of this exam. No network, no web server. When we set things up like this, we don't need the network anymore, because what we're going to do is we're going to set up a repository of all the packages for the operating system we're running on one of the VMs on your laptop or on your desktop machine, as the case may be. So that way, no matter what happens, your little world of your VMs and your environment can continue to work no matter what your outside network status is. That was really a lot of the point of this, and it makes it much quicker and easier to do everything because you don't have to wait for the network and that type of thing. And just for the record, this was really set up for, I set it up for the Red Hat exams, but you could use it if you're studying for Linux Plus, if you're studying for the Linux Professional Institute exams. They all would work pretty much the same way. So what do we need to set up our lab like this? We need a downloaded ISO file of the distribution that you want to run your lab on. Now, for this purpose, for this lab, we're doing a Red Hat based one, which is, it was in the title as CentOS, but you can use actual Red Hat ISOs. You can use CentOS, you can use Scientific Linux. Rocky Linux is in the works right now to be a replacement for CentOS. I'm not going to get into the whole history of that unless we have time for the questions later. But any of those versions of Red Hat should work fine with that. You need a host computer with the virtualization software already loaded. I don't get into loading that virtualization software here because it could be different based on your distro. With my example here, we're going to use Ubuntu Mate for the host, and we're going to use KVM for the virtualization software. That's our base for this. If you were to use CentOS for the base, or Fedora, or just about any distro, it works basically the same as long as you have the KVM virtualization software, and Virt Manager, which is the graphical front end to that software on your machine. Now, you could also do this on a Windows machine or a Macintosh if you have virtualization software installed. So if you have VMware or you have VirtualBox on your Windows or Mac, you can certainly set this up the same way. Of course, the implementation details of setting up your actual VMs is going to be a little bit different, and your network addresses are going to be different. So, this could be done on other systems as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a VM to be our local repository. And this is going to be the one that all the other VMs are going to pull their packages from after you've set them up. So I'm going to go through the steps here, and then I'm going to go over to another screen, and I'm going to go through all of these things. So we're going to start the virtual manager. Actually, that's the one step I've already done. And we're going to select create a new VM. We're going to select our local install media, and the media is on my server already. This was the part I said you have to start out with. You have to have your ISO image already downloaded. So you're going to use that ISO image. Let's see, we're going to choose local storage volume, browse local, and select the ISO for your distro. And then, and then select forward. Wow, got ahead of that there. So let's flip over and get started here. So what we're going to do is I have my virtualization, my virtual machine manager loaded, and this is KVM's VirtMan, virtual machine manager. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new VM. We're going to use local install media. I've already selected that. Normally what you would do is you would browse through your local directories and select your DVD image. And we're going to use CentOS 8.2 for this example. So we'll choose the volume. With this one, there's a new development with CentOS 8 where we have to tell it what operating system it is, but that's not much of a hindrance. If it asks for it, you tell it what version of the operating system. Let me do that again. CentOS 8. There we go. So it defaults to 1.5 gigs. I believe the slides say 1 gig is enough. With CentOS 8, it requires 1.5 gigs to work correctly. And we'll leave it with 2 CPUs. That's fine. You can even do 1. It just takes a little longer. And we're going to leave the disk space the way it is. You could get by with a little bit less, but let's leave it at the default of 20. So we're going to call this AAA repo just so it ends up at the top of our list without any fussing. So we're going to start. I'm not going to test the media because I've already done that. I'm going to install CentOS. We're going to get this rolling, and then I'll open it up for a mid-presentation short amount of questions. So it's setting up. Oh, I need to flip back because we have slides on this. Hold on. So we've selected forward. The VM details, sorry, I got a little ahead of the slides here. You choose your memory and CPU options. 1 gig and 1 CPU is okay with Red Hat 7 and below. With CentOS 8 or Red Hat 8, you generally want to go with at least 1.5 gigs. And if it defaults to 2 CPUs, if you have them, that's great. The default also goes to 20 gigs instead of 16 gigs. That's fine too. And we name our VM something to make it easier. So that's where I came up with the name from. So now we're going to install CentOS. When we flip back, it's going to be in the graphical installer. We're going to select our language. Generally, the test is given in English, so I would recommend at least being familiar with that. We're going to select the installation destination. It requires that you go in and just verify that it's the disk you want to install to. And what we want to do is under software installation, we want to select either server or infrastructure server and make sure we've selected the FTP server checkbox. This makes our life much easier later on down the line. And then I generally make sure the network is turned on and give it a host name, although the host name is optional for this. But making sure Ethernet is enabled will make your life easier as well. So we're going to select our language. I'm going to select English. There we go. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the installation destination. You don't have to check anything. You can see our only disk is checkmarked here, so we can just click done. We are going to make sure our software selection, I'm going to select server, and I'm going to make sure it has FTP server selected. Ooh, I'm going to click on the right thing, FTP server. So this is going to automatically install the software for the FTP server, which makes our life easier later. And then we're going to make sure, for some reason, by default, the network isn't on. So we're going to call this, so I've turned the network on, and we're going to give it a name. We'll call it repo.example.org. The name isn't really important, though, because we're generally we don't have DNS set up here, at least not initially. So we're going to need the IP address when the time comes. And we have an IP address already. It's going to be 175. I'll try to remember that for later. I probably won't. I'll have to look it up. So we're going to do begin installation. Two other steps here. Let me not get too far ahead of the slides. We click begin installation. If we have an opportunity, we're going to create a root password and a user password. And then we'll have a minute or two for questions. So our root password is super secure. Wow, I'm typing badly this morning. It's the keyboard. So there's that. And I usually create a user account as well. You can see I have warnings about the password being weak. That's okay, though. So our system is installing. It doesn't take very long. It'll probably take less than 5 minutes. Then when it's done, we reboot. When it reboots, we log in, and we start with the next section. So just for the meantime, does anybody have any questions while we're waiting for our system to, while we're waiting for our system to install here? You see it'll go through about 600 packages, and then it has to create, compiles a kernel and then creates the init ramfs. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a pretty good time for it. I'm going to stop sharing for now.
Are you running on a Unix, Unix on your laptop, a Unix, I mean a Linux installation on your laptop?
Absolutely, and that's the way I initially set all of this up. I happen to be on my desk. If we were doing this live at TCF, I would be doing this demo on my laptop. Of course, because we're here, I use my beefier desktop, and that's fine. But yes, you can absolutely do this on a laptop. You can actually do it on a fairly low-spec laptop at that. I can do a lot of this stuff on a converted Chromebook, which is a 1.5 gigahertz Celeron with 4 gigs of RAM. So frankly, a very low spec machine. And I have done a lot of this stuff with that. Now, forget about using graphical interfaces on your VMs. Forget about getting into anything really CPU intensive on those VMs, because they're gonna, drag the system down the tubes. I probably wouldn't entertain doing this on a machine with less than 4 gigs. And honestly, 8 to 16 gigs is a much better place to be. I find that much more than the CPU, the RAM is really what restrains your ability to run a couple of VMs on this. And all of my laptops and desktops run Linux, so you can absolutely run it on Linux on a laptop.
Okay, thanks.
Sure thing. Any other questions? Let me check over on my machine here. Still configuring. Anyone else?
Have you tried running Linux on an old Amiga? I see your Amiga poster behind you.
Yeah, while I am an old-time Amiga user, I don't have any setup right now. No, I always thought the Amiga had a perfectly adequate operating system, so I never felt the need to replace it with Linux. All the PCs, of course, needed a decent operating system, and the Macs. So those typically get Linux on them. Other questions?
Have you tried doing this installation with the graphical interface versions?
Absolutely. If you have enough RAM and a decent CPU, it absolutely works fine. All of the stuff that I was doing for my studies, none of it required a GUI, so I typically wasn't doing that. But in the process of running these and fooling around, I've absolutely messed around with them with the GUI, and they work just fine. So if you want to use the GUI tools as part of your studies or exploration, or whatever you want to do with this, absolutely works fine with that.
Yeah, I tried to do that, actually installed one version of CentOS 8, but when I selected and it's listed on the internet if you poke around, that there's some issue with doing it with the GUI interface, and I ran into that same issue.
Oh, really? Well, one thing to note with this, okay, so our install is done. We're going to reboot, but I'm going to comment a little bit about that. One thing that, as far as doing virtualization with the GUI, the machine you're looking at now, not just the one in virtualization, but the host that you see here is actually a VM on my computer. I don't really trust the Zoom software on my main PC, so I installed the Zoom software in a VM, and everything you're watching now is happening in a VM. So the VM in Linux does work in virtualization. It may not have worked right in CentOS 8, although I have to say I have used them on CentOS 8. Maybe it was, I don't know. I don't know why it didn't work, but I've used it with the graphical interface, both RHEL 8 and CentOS 8.
It's just when you do the installation that there's something hokey with the installation stuff, and you only see like half the screen, and you sort of got to guess where you're clicking on in order to get it to install. After the installation is done, everything works fine.
Yeah, I absolutely will not deny that you had a problem with it, but I did not see that problem. I have actually installed them graphically and had no problem. So I think that's going to be your results may vary with that.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. Okay. So let me get back to the slides here. I'm sorry. Was that a question?
Sorry, I was just going to say there was a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Can you read it off to me? I've already got everything shared here.
It says, what about a replacement for free CentOS from Red Hat?
This will absolutely work if you sign up for a developer account or whatever their new program is for production servers. The version of Red Hat that you get from that works just fine and will work. Everything I'm doing, it will be the same. So the new version of Red Hat is just fine with this. And I did a lot of my studies with a genuine version of Red Hat exactly like this. So everything you see here, I mean, obviously the only difference in practice that you'll see is obviously your file name for your ISO, and Red Hat will bug you to register your system, which if you've signed up for one of those free Red Hat systems, it should be, you should have no problem with that. You could just enter that information in. But everything I'm doing here works exactly the same with the genuine Red Hat one. That answer your question? His question? Their question?
Yep, he put a thumbs up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here are the steps we're going to do to set up our repo server. Actually, I need to log in, but I'm not going to flip over to do that until we're ready to go. So we're going to start and enable the FTP service. And there's a sub-step before that. We need to make a change because CentOS 8 has changed their default for the FTP server. I'll explain that in a minute. But these are the basic steps. We're going to start and enable our FTP service. We're going to open a firewall port for the FTP server. We're going to copy files from the ISO file to the server to a place where the FTP server can serve them from. And then we're going to create a repo file to tell the operating system to use FTP for getting its updates and software from that repository that we just created. So I'm going to start going through those steps now. So setting up your FTP server. Unfortunately, there's a lot of text here, and I apologize for that. I'm going to flip back and forth a few times. So the first thing we need to do is enable anonymous access. So we need to edit. I'm going to use VI. You use whatever editor you're comfortable with. The etc, and there should be a slash in front of that. Found a typo. So put a slash in front of that etc. /etc/vsftpd/vsftpd.conf. There's a line that says anonymous enable. You either need to change it from no to yes, or just comment it out because the default is yes, but it's set to no in the configuration by default. This is a change that happened with CentOS 8, so this is sort of jammed onto this slide because it's a change. If you're doing this with Red Hat 7, you don't have to bother with this step because anonymous enable is defaulted to on. So then we need to start our FTP server, which we're going to use system control, start vsftpd, and it's not just FTP because the default server in the Red Hat distributions is very safe file transfer protocol daemon. That's the name of the FTP program. Then we're going to enable it so that every time that machine is rebooted, this service will also start. So we're going to do system control enable vsftpd. We can check it. I may fly by the seat of the pants though. You should check it if you're not sure. Then we're going to set our firewall up so that FTP traffic is allowed through the firewall. So we're going to do firewall command, add service equals FTP, and then -- permanent. That'll make the changes happen. If we were to not put permanent, it would change it for now, but then the next time you reboot it, it would go back. So we're going to put permanent. And then we're going to enable those firewall changes by doing a reload. And then we can check our IP address, but I'm pretty sure it's 175. I'll double check, make sure. So I'm going to go through all of these steps now. So we have to log in with our secure password. So the first thing we're going to do is edit that file. So we're going to do, and we'll see if I can remember it and don't have to flip back. Etsy vsftpd vsftpd.conf. So if you look here, anonymous enable is set to no. What we want to do is, I'm just going to do this the easy way. I'm going to insert a £sign so that it is then allowed. And you can see the line above it says, beware, allowed by default if you comment this out. That's what I want. So I've commented that line out. I'm going to save and quit our file. Then we're going to start and enable our FTP daemon. So we're going to do system control, start vsftpd. It gave us a very quiet acknowledgement there. System control. And what we're going to do is we're going to set it so that it starts every time this VM starts. Enable vsftpd. Now, it said it created a symlink. It didn't give me an error, so it works. So I'm going to check it anyway, so that way you know what to see. We'll do status and make sure that both of these things happened. And if you look, it says VSTP loaded, service enabled, and it says active running, which means our FTP daemon is running, which is good. So the next step we need to do, and I'll just do a flip back so you can see where we're at here. So we've completed the enabling anonymous access. We've started the FTP server. We've enabled it. We've checked it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set our firewall and enable those changes. So we're going to do firewall command, add service equals FTP. And I'm going to not forget to put perm. You could spell out permanent, but perm is enough to get the drift here. It says success. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do a firewall command. We're going to do reload. So now our firewall has the FTP service enabled and open, and it's ready to go. And I'll do the last step. I'll do IPA. And our IP address on this is 175. That's going to be important in a minute or two. So let's go back to the next slide. Oh, okay. Now what we need to do is we need to copy all the files from that disk to our repository. Now all of that stuff is set up. So now this is where this will be different if you're using VMware. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the virtual machine. I'm going to do details. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect our CD-ROM. Now, if I do this drop down, it'll give me, let's do browse. I believe it'll direct me right to where I was. It didn't exactly. So we're going to select CentOS 8.2. So this is our DVD that we installed from. We're going to use this same one, and we're going to attach it to this. Okay, this error says the ISO is already in use by other guests. That's okay. It's a read-only disk, and it won't cause a problem for both of them to read that. So let's go back to our console. I'm going to go back to the slides so that we don't miss any steps here. So we've selected our CD-ROM. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a directory for it, and I'm going to make root temp. I'm going to mount that newly attached CD-ROM to that directory, and then I'm going to use the rsync program, and you could just copy stuff. Whatever method you want to use to copy those files is fine, but I'm going to use rsync to copy all those files, and this goes relatively quickly. So let's get to it here. So we'll do make directory, temp, let's mount dev CD-ROM. which is our default place that DVDs or CDs are attached to the system, to root temp. It says good, that warning is good, device write protected. So it's it's acting like a DVD, so it can't be written to. So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do rsync and just some things to give us some status. We'll do root, did I do temp? Temp 2, and this address is interesting. So it's var FTP pub, which is the default public area for files in an FTP server. For our purpose, this is the perfect place to put these files so that they're easily accessible by the FTP server. Ah, if you put a typo in, things don't work. I told you I'd make a mistake somewhere. So this only takes a minute or two because it's local. So the next thing we're going to do, I'll explain this a little bit up front. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a file to tell the system when you want updates or you want to install new software, you go to this FTP server. Now, in this case, the FTP server is actually going to be itself. So we're being a little self-referential here. So you'll actually be accessing the FTP server on the local machine. But then when we set it up this way, when we go to our other machines and point them to it, we can just copy this file because this will already be set up correctly for this. So, and I'm going to go through all of these parts in here. This is the bare essentials to set up a repository. Let's see how our copy has come along. Okay, we're done already. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go to where the system looks to say there's a file in the system that tells the system where do you go for system updates. That is located in etc yum.repos.d. That's in the slide, and that'll be in the when I flip back to it. Now, if we look at it now, all of these files say CentOS. These are all the network repositories provided by the CentOS project. We don't want to use any of these. We want to keep it local. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move all of these files to our root directory. I'm not going to get rid of them in case we want them later, but I want them out of here so that the system doesn't try to go to them. So now we have a nice clean directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do vim network.repo. And so based on what was on the other slide, we're going to add everything in here. So we're going to, now there are two sections. On Red Hat 8, there are two different sections we need to create. On Red Hat 7, it was a little bit simpler. You just told it the repo place. With this one, we have to do a base OS and an app stream. There are two different actual subsections in the repository. So we're going to do base OS first, and you put the name of the section in brackets, and then you do name equals base OS. I'm not sure why it's in there twice. We're going to put GPG check equals 0 because we don't really need to check. We know what ISO image we got this from. We know that we're not going out over the network, so we know these files should be safe. Now here's the line that has the real key to this whole thing. It's called base URL. And what this is this is where all of the files are found. So we're going to do FTP 192.168.122.175, which I'm pretty sure is our IP address. I'll check it when we're done. So what we're telling it is the place where you're going to find your files is at this FTP server. And we're going to do pub, and then below that, we do base OS. Now we're going to do the second part, which is our app stream. Name equals app stream. I don't know why it needs to be in there twice. It's from the Department of Redundancy department, I guess. GPG check equals 0, just like the other one. And then our base URL is going to be similar. Base URL equals FTP://192.168.122.175/pub, but we're going to put in app stream. So you see those two sections? Each section is only 4 lines. It's not as complicated as it looks. We've got the name of the section again under name, GPG check equals 0, and then your base URL for that. So I'm going to save and quit. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to quit just yet. Let's take a look and see if I forgot something. So we moved all of our files out into the root directory. We edited our network repo file, base OS, name equals base OS, base URL equals, and then FTP : the IP address. Oops, sorry. Wow. Okay. The IP address, pub, base OS, GPG check equals 0. It doesn't matter if those are in different order. And then we save and quit. And then we test it out. Our first test of our repository. So I'm going to save and quit. And we're going to do yum clean all. You should do this in case if at some point something got installed, it's going to be confused. But that shouldn't be a problem. So now we're going to do yum install. And I use MC as an example because it pulls files out of both of those repositories. So we get to check, make sure if they both work. Uh-oh. That's taking longer than it should. I'm not happy about that. Did I get my IP right? 122.175. That appears to be running. Ah, of course, the demo gods are cruel. I need to go look for typos in my file, I think. Anybody catch me on anything? Okay, let's take a look at the file. Actually, let me take a look. That looks okay. Let's take a look at our file, see if I messed something up. Ah, nobody caught me. It should be 192.168, not 192.169. So that's probably it. So let's try this again. I'm going to do yum clean all again. And I'm going to do a yum install MC. Ah, much better. So you can see the first package that's going to be installed is MC, and that's coming out of AppStream, and all of the Perl dependencies are coming out of base OS. Ah, that was exciting. Okay, so we've successfully installed our program, which means our base OS and our AppStream repositories are both working. Of course, this doesn't test the firewall because this is all local. So we have one more test coming when we do the other machine. So we'll see how that goes. So let's go back. Now that I had that excitement, I forget where I am on the slides. So we've created our local repo. We have correctly put in the address. Putting in the address correctly is, as you can see, quite key. Save and quit, yum clean all, yum install the program to test. And after a minor setback, everything worked. So when we create the local repo in RHEL 7, it's much shorter because you just give the pub directory and it finds everything from there, which is a little bit simpler. So if you're doing Red Hat 7, the setup is a little bit simpler. But since none of the Red Hat exams use Red Hat 7 anymore, I doubt this will be much of an issue. So now our repository is done, assuming that the firewall settings are set the way they should be. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new CD. This time we're going to do a minimal install, so we can go a little bit quicker. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, but this one will go a little bit quicker even than the other one. So let's create another new VM. If we have time at the end, I'll tell you, there used to be a neat trick we could do, which doesn't work with CentOS 8 anymore. but does work with Red Hat. So I'll demonstrate that if I have time. I don't know if I'll have that much time though. No, I missed it again. Unfortunately, you have to tell it CentOS anymore. CentOS 8. Okay, minimum on that is okay. Minimum on that is okay. We call it. Just going to pop that at the top of the list as well. So we're going to create another VM since we have the time. While that's going, I'll give another little section for questions. Do the destination quickly. We'll do the network quickly. I'm not even going to bother with the name for this one. We'll do software selection minimal for maximum speed and get moving. I'm just going to do we'll do a quick user. And we'll let that chug along. So does anybody have any questions? I'm more than happy to answer questions for a few minutes. You can see this is less packages, so it'll go a little bit quicker.
Yes, quick question.
Sure.
I'm sure you already said this, but where will the recording of this video that you're creating right now and the slides be available for later installs? I need to do Red Hat 7 because I've got an older piece of hardware.
Oh, okay. I have put a link to my recording of this in the chat. I don't know when or where the TCF versions will be, but the slides are at github.com/murphnj/homelab.
NJJ, not T, /homelab.
Here.
Yes,
I don't really want to blow this out and go back to the beginning. Let me pull up the PDF. There you go. There's your, in case I was unclear in saying it verbally.
The link is in the chat if you
Oh,
want to click on it.
okay. It's in many places then. Okay, let's see how we're coming along on that. Here we go. We can reboot. So the next step we're going to do while we're waiting for this to reboot, which doesn't take long. So we've already set that up. There's our time for questions. What we're going to do is we're going to copy the repo file from the server. Now, you could just recreate it yourself if you like, and this is the Red Hat 7 one. You would obviously recreate it exactly the same way you did it on the other one. But I'm going to SCP it from our repository to where it belongs. So we also have to clean out that directory exactly the same way we did before. So we're going to cd etc yum repos d. And you see we have all those same files there. We're going to move all of those to somewhere else. And then we're going to do scp 168.122.175, the same address we used before, but we're going to do etc yum repos d network.repo. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy it from our server to our current location. Unless I don't tell it it's a remote machine, in which case. Okay, so now we have, if we look at this, we have that same file that we created on our server on this machine. So now what should happen is that when I tell it to install software, it will install it from our network repo, which is our other VM. So I'm going to do a yum clean all, again, just in case, 0 files removed, nothing really happened there. So what we're going to do is we're going to do yum install MC and see if it works. Ah, that's a good sign. And installed all of that locally. So now, for every subsequent VM we create, all we have to do is get that file from the repo or recreate it, and every machine will now get its software from the same place. So if I do a yum update, it should say nothing to do, because the repo that it's looking to for updates is exactly the same CD it was installed from. So all the software is automatically up to date. And nothing will get out of sync. Nothing will be a newer version that you have to worry about not being available on the test or anything like that. So that's pretty much it. So we have our complete self-contained Linux network with local repositories. We can install software without a network connection. All the VMs will get new software from our local machine, not the internet, so everything stays in sync nicely. So now I have more time for questions. Let me stop sharing for now. Something that was interesting with the older versions of Cent and the current version of Red Hat, but not CentOS for some reason, you used to be able to install all of your new VMs right from that repository. And I tested this with several different things. It still works in Red Hat, in CentOS 7, Red Hat 7, it works in Red Hat 8, but under CentOS it doesn't work anymore, so I wasn't able to do that trick. And I apologize for that. But so if you're doing this with Red Hat, you can actually then detach your CD and install all of your new VMs right from that repository, which is kind of neat. Okay, sorry, I'll open it up for questions now.
Can you please show that previous slide again?
Oh, which one with the
Links.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, I did that rather quickly. My apologies, I'll get that back. Ah, there we go.
Got it. Think.
Is that all you need?
Yep. Just had to get a screenshot.
Oh, okay. Again, all the slides are online too, so all of this information is in there. There are a few typos in the one online.
Where the link.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Our lab.
So any other? Hour, yes, not hour like as in hours, but as in it takes about 1 hour to do, or even a little bit less, as we have demonstrated.
Okay, because you said Homelab previously.
Did I?
Yeah.
My apologies. I would trust the link rather. That's the problem with me saying it from memory as opposed to having it on a slide. I would definitely trust the slide. You know what? I'm going to double check this right now. Oh, nice.
Okay.
Ah, it is our lab. Oh, and if you type get HUG, so githug.com, that doesn't take you to the right place either. I just tried that. Takes you to a domain squatter. Thank goodness. It could have been worse. So, any other questions? I'm happy to answer questions about VM performance under Linux or desktop Linux or anything regarding the home lab or anything else. I'm more than happy to take a look. I should look in the chat now that I can. Typo in the temp. Someone caught me. Yes, Daryl caught me. Yeah, I thought I caught all the typos in that, but apparently I did not. Okay, I usually get more questions, more puzzlements on why things are done a certain way. Timothy, I believe you're trying to talk, but you're muted.
Thank you. I do have one question. I've created VMs before for Cali on my Mac, but if I create a VM for this network repo, would I be able to
Yes.
boot from a piece of hardware on my local home network to use my VM on my Mac from an actual server I've got in the closet that's just bare metal?
You absolutely, so in other words, well, it depends. See, on the Mac, I can't answer that as accurately. Right now, like I say, I mentioned this earlier, maybe everybody didn't catch it. I don't trust Zoom software, so I'm running Zoom in a VM, and my virtual machine manager that you saw me using is actually accessing the virtualization on the host machine. So the machine you're seeing here isn't actually hosting those VMs. It's actually being run from the host. So if I actually hooked up my other machine on the other side of the room, I could actually access that machine's virtualization and view the VMs from here. So I think that's what you're talking about, is like you have a server in the closet that's actually running your VMs. Can you access it from your Mac?
No, cut the
Now
other.
with KV,
I want to create the repo on a
yeah,
VM on my Mac, and that'll be the repo for the rest of the house. And then for my
okay.
laptop running Cali, and for my bare metal machine that I'm going to load CentOS 7 onto, I want to be able to access the repo that's on my Mac and use that to install various operating systems on the various machines in my house, my laptop and the bare metal server in the closet.
Assuming that those machines are reachable on the network, there's no reason that couldn't happen. Cali is based on Ubuntu, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of these instructions are not going to be the same. I'm not sure how to set that up under a Debian-based, or an Ubuntu-based system, but I know it can be done. But the Red Hat part will absolutely work.
Of Yum.
What's that?
It uses aptget, aptget.
Yeah, it's an Ubuntu-based one. Actually, my host machine is running Pop! OS, which is also an Ubuntu-based distribution. So I'm not unfamiliar with it. Yeah, I don't know how to set that up, though. The instructions will definitely be very different. You're going to have to Google how to set up an apt repo, because that's going to be different. But the Yum part, assuming that machine you have set up on your Mac is reachable over the network, there's no reason that you couldn't use that as a repository for any Red Hat machines out there. And then subsequently, if you get it working for apt, you could use it for any apt, any PKG, Debian or Ubuntu-based distribution. Okay. I just don't have the instructions handy to do that. My next demonstration.
I just got to fiddle with VMware's bridge so that it's reachable.
Yeah, see, the thing is with mine is I always intend for it to be not network dependent. So if you plop down with your laptop, everything works the way it is. And so none of what I showed you set up, I don't have any of the IPs bridged. So you wouldn't be able to reach any of those VMs from outside of my system. But I could very easily, when I set up that VM, tell it to have a bridged address and then reach it from outside of that machine. So yes, what you want to do is perfectly attainable. My instructions will not get you completely there, though.
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of realized that, but it's doable. I've done it once before.
Yeah, I mean, this gives you the framework. But like I say, obviously your repo machine is going to have to be reachable somewhere else. So your network is going to be different. In the chat, why do you not trust Zoom? They were rather dishonest with their encryption, and they ask for a lot of permission on your system when you install the client. I have no problem running the web client from my Linux machines, but installing the software requires permissions I'm not happy with giving them, so I do not. Because I don't really trust them to do that. And honestly, I've used Zoom on the web in social gatherings, and the web experience on Zoom seems like a third-class citizen. The Linux client, the Linux client that they have at least works considerably better, especially when I'm presenting in front of people. I wouldn't want to risk using the web client for that. So I set it up in a VM so I can be confident that Zoom only gets what I give it inside the VM. So I'm sort of happy with this arrangement since it worked the way it was supposed to. Does that answer your question, John? Short answer is I trust Zoom as far as I could throw them. And they're a big company, so I don't think I could throw them very far.
All the way to China.
Yeah. 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 And you could do that with any software you don't trust. I was experimenting with stuff like I have a large USB microphone and I have a camera, and I've passed those through to the VM so that they work with native performance, as native as any VM can be, but with native performance, it's as if this microphone and this camera are plugged into that VM directly. And I thought that was going to be your question in setting up your thing, is when you said physically plug things in. I was able to install operating systems by plugging a USB key into the host machine and then passing that USB key through to the VM. And then I was able to boot off of it and install. So it was one I didn't happen to have an ISO for. I only had install media on a USB device, and I was able to get a machine to install and boot that way.
Yeah, that's how I had to boot Cali, from a USB key containing Kali, and put that in a VM on my laptop.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. I don't know how the repos work in that regard then, because you're not getting, see, when you install.
One reinstall every time you need to make a second OS.
That's actually, and when you need to update, it's probably a good idea to install. I've heard people say, oh, how do I install Cali and use it as my everyday OS? And I cringe and I go, it's a tool that's not really meant for that at all. If you're thinking about how do I install LibreOffice on Cali so I can use it, you're doing it wrong. Use some distribution that gets updated on a regular basis for your day-to-day stuff, and use Cali for the security research and penetration testing that it was designed for. You probably shouldn't use Cali as your everyday. I mean, if you're really good with it, I guess go for it, but I don't know if I'd recommend that to anybody that's not
It's too
fragile. Yeah. Run something else as your daily, and then use Cali for it's an awesome tool for what it was made for. It's like saying, how do I haul plywood with my Ferrari? No, the Ferrari is really good at one thing that's going really fast on the track. You don't get it to make your Home Depot runs. I mean, I suppose you could, but it's not the right tool for the job.
Yeah, when you strap a 8x4 piece of plywood onto the fin that keeps your rear end down, it
Yeah. Can you do it? Sure. Is it a great idea? Probably not. No. So, yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions? Actually, we're pretty close. So we're within a couple of minutes at the end here. So if anybody else has questions, I think we can get one or two in, depending upon how much I blather about stuff. John asked, should I uninstall Zoom? I put, up to you. I leave it in this VM because I'm pretty much, this VM is called Zoomy. This is pretty much a VM to run Zoom in. And like I said, I have my virtual machine manager in here to do this, and I was very glad it worked this way. but this is pretty much a dedicated VM for Zoom for me. And then I can feel like it's isolated. I don't have to worry about it getting into the rest of my system. But that's up to me. That's up to you. Well, my system is up to me, I guess.
I have
Sure.
a question.
Sure.
If you're not comfortable fooling around with VMs, or if it's overkill, it might be simpler to just create an unprivileged user on your own machine, whether it's Mac or Windows. It's pretty darn trivial to create an unprivileged user, or just use the built-in guest user and install.
My question would be, will Zoom allow an unprivileged user to install the application just for that user? Or does it require admin privileges?
You will have to type your admin password.
Then there's no point in using that unprivileged user because you're giving it admin rights anyway.
Oh,
What I would suggest, if you want to keep it secure, if you're not familiar with VMs and you want to do Zoom and you don't trust them on your machine as I do, you could always get a bootable Linux distribution or something similar, boot off of Linux, off of a thumb drive plugged into your machine, install Zoom in that. When you reboot your machine, when you're done with that, it will all go away and it won't have access to your machine. Sure. Tim, question?
for people who aren't Linux familiar, you can also, for a modest fee, buy a bootable Windows thumb drive that just boots a Windows install from a thumb drive. It's reasonably inexpensive.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but
new machine, and a lot easier for non-technical people than learning VMware or the other VirtualBox machines.
yeah, true. A bootable Ubuntu thumb drive is pretty approachable these days too, though. So, hey,
Yeah.
if you ever wanted a little taste of Linux without going whole hog and trying to either negotiate a VM or dual booting your machine, you could just boot off of a thumb drive and give it a shot, and it won't damage your system and give you a little taste of the other side if you want to give it a try.
Yeah, you could run an app like Zoom without ever having to touch a command line. It just looks like
Yeah, absolutely.
a desktop.
Yep. Okay,